on workplace diversity, the strategizing for business success. This is something very important topic where, trending one, I see that very eminent speakers and panelists out here. And this is need for the hour. I'm sure that there will be a huge takeaway for this session. With this, I invite Grace Samson, Vice President, HR Head of. Request others to please go on mute. The controller, if you could just mute everyone and unmute only the speakers, that will be helpful. So with this, without further delay, I invite Dr. Grace Samson, Vice President and Head HR of Informatica India. Great to have you, Grace, and other speakers, Ranjit, Singh from Broadridge. We have Yamini, Krishnan, Senior HR from IQVIA. We have Harini Muralidharan, HR Head, and people, era people partnering, colleague relations of Tesco. And we have Vikas Dubey, Director HR of Persistent System. And we have Yasmeen Shaikh, Senior Director HR of Genex Healthcare. Great to have all of you with us today. And with this, now I invite Dr. Grace Samson to take the session forward.
Thank you, Shiva, and thank you, GWFM and Shanti Business School for this wonderful opportunity on a Saturday evening. I'm sure it is the passion for the topic that we're going to be discussing that's got all of us here on a weekend together. And I'd love to welcome my wonderful panelists out here. More than panelists, I would say they're fantastic friends, to be meeting on a Saturday evening to really discuss, one of my personally favorite topics. I'm sure, it is the same with each of you as well. So very warm welcome, Yasmeen, Yamini, Harini, Anirvan. It is an absolute delight to be your moderator today. And of course, all of our other participants and audience out here, I do see about 140 people listening in. So 140 very good evenings to all of you. And of course, wishing you a great Onam festival today, right? I'm going to invite you on this small journey before we jump into talking about this huge topic that we have on hand. Just come with me on this journey for the next 60 seconds and try to imagine yourself in this world where you have only one color, only one race, only one gender, right? Everything you look is only one single thing. Just imagine as you keep traveling along that journey, maybe at the beginning, it's very exciting to just see everything, looking so equal and one. But what happens when there's only one skill, there's only one sport, when there's only one gender, one color? How would our world look? That is really what we're going to be talking about today, right? Workplace diversity. That's the topic that we're going to be talking. And how does one really strategize, workplace diversity to be really successful in our businesses that we do in our respective organizations, right? And I'm sure all of you will definitely agree with me that nobody really strategizes for failure, right? In any organization, failure happens when we don't strategize for success. And that's really what most organizations have been really looking at. Diversity, equality, inclusion, belonging is really not a topic which is very new to any of us. And most organizations have been really very passionate about attempting various kind of strategies, various kind of initiatives to really bring in diversity into the workforce to make this workforce a lot more vibrant. However, not all of these strategies have really worked for all organizations. So today, as part of this panel discussion, what we're here to understand is what are those key strategic elements that we need to really remember and put into place as organizations? What are things that may really work brilliantly well? And what are some of those things that might just backfire? Right? And also, how do we step forward in the future of workplace to really make our workplace a lot more vibrant with diversity, with inclusion, with belongingness and equality? That's really what this elite panel is going to be discussing today. And I'd love to start off with Yasmeen to really share your views, Yasmeen, about what workplace diversity actually means to you, and how relevant is strategizing workplace diversity according to you.
Thank you so much, Grace, for having me here today, and GWFM and SBS, and good to meet all my co-panelists. I think that's a fantastic context setting by you, Grace, and I think it makes me easier to answer what you already asked me. So I think if you look at diversity, equity, and inclusion, it really means automatically thinking diverse views and everything diverse. And I think as organizations today, we're looking at how can we create equality, equity, and inclusion as we all want to be great places to work. So for me, I think it goes, like you said, looking beyond just a particular area, but I think saying different skills, different experiences, which could enable and foster positive thinking, which could foster engagement, belongingness in the workplace, which is motivating people, because when they see the ways of working, which are very inclusive as an organization, automatically, I think employee morale is taken care of. We end up creating a fearless environment for everyone to work, where we're eliminating biases and differential treatment. So diversity is really about all of us coming together with different views, different experiences, different age groups, towards a unified vision of what the organization needs, trying to create that inclusivity in the way of working, again, keeping that goal in mind and being mindful, being consciously mindful about how we're coming across in terms of treating each other and creating equity for everyone along. So that's how I would summarize this. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much. That was a wonderful, wonderful summary. Let me go on to Yamini to really understand about workforce diversity and how does strategizing it really help the organization. So take it away, Yamini.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Grace. And thank you so much, Parthuda and Shiva, for giving this opportunity. And thank you, SBS, for actually making our Saturdays more enlightening and interesting. It's a great to be part of this panel. So, Grace, for me to start with diversity, as you started, as you stated at the beginning, has been one of my closest to the heart kind of a subject. Personally, I feel like a champion who takes it forward in spirit wherever I work with. So as an organization, when we talk about diversity, I feel it's not just about having a balance in genders. We need to make sure that each and every person who's going to be part of this organization gets an equal opportunity, and we take them along. We give them wings to chase their dreams, irrespective of their race, creed, orientation, or whatever is their uh, alignment, right? uh, a lot of organizations have started this journey consciously quite some time back. Some have taken it extremely seriously and moved forward very fast. Some are still taking baby steps. I feel all of us in HR as leaders, we have definitely tried our best to contribute and see how we can pull this forward, right? This is like a huge momentum which has started across in various industries. Some industries like, especially IT or ITES have definitely gone leaps and bounds. There are still a lot of industries or certain segments of workforce which are still probably trying to find these footsteps in this diversity barrier. So for me, this is an opportunity for all of us to get an equal footing in whatever we do, showcase our talents irrespective of what somebody else is trying to judge or guide or feels should be our status. This is an individual journey. I feel as an organization, we are giving them a collective step to move forward. So it's very important from the people perspective, very important from an organizational branding perspective, and even for productivity, because it brings in a whole lot of balance from various angles. And that actually brings in a lot more emotion into every business that you are actually trying to do or take forward. Uh, Various segments would actually add to the colors. So for me, it has always been a beautiful rainbow of getting people together. And I'm glad we are able to play a small part of ours in this journey.
Amazing. Thank you, Yamini. And with that, I'm going to really turn this over to Harini to hear her thoughts around, the topic. So over to you, Harini.
Thanks, Grace. So first of all, thanks a lot for the invitation. And I think it's really been a pleasure to be invited into this forum, both by Partha Shiva as well as the entire forum itself. So for me, it's really all about ensuring that everyone is welcome in the system. And that's really what my organization has always stood for. Ensuring that every single person who's there has a voice in the system, they can be heard irrespective of the forum and the circumstances. The environment has to be conducive enough for people to be able to open up and be able to share. And that's true inclusion and diversity for us. I'd probably say that there's been a great amount of maturity which has been built over the last 2 or 3 years, probably more so than earlier. And I think people have understood the value which diversity and inclusion has really brought to the table for business. It's also really nice to see, of course, that the conversation has now moved away from just the woman empowerment story and actually looking at the full spectrum of gender, even looking at things around the disability space, right? I think a lot of the organizations were very uncomfortable about talking about it, but that's really opened up a completely different dimension. I probably, in short, would say that inclusion is probably going to be the big differentiator, especially with the pandemic. And as more organizations are looking to bring back colleagues into office, right? How are you going to really work through the hybrid model? How are you going to ensure that there is an inclusion conversation which is always on every single time, and ensuring that irrespective of where people work from, whether it's office or home, they really feel included, is going to be a real game changer in the entire thing. So yeah, I'd like to see how that entire story unfolds for sure.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much. And I'm really going to go over to Rajita to really hear her views around why we really discussing diversity now, right? Diversity, equality, inclusion, right? This has been a topic in discussion for many, many years. However, why now? So Rajita, can I invite you to throw some light on that question, please?
Thank you, Grace, and thanks everyone for having all of us. And I think some great points already been shared. I want to give a story, Grace, and that's the reason, when we were having that chat, I said that that's important to bring it out. So bear with me, it's going to be less than a minute. There is a concept, there's a shrine in Japan, it's called Ise Jingu, okay, or Jingu. I don't know how to pronounce it exactly, but that's what it is. So this is a grand shrine which dates back almost about 2000 years, okay? And every 20 years, the entire shrine is rebuilt using the same materials, the same construction techniques, and it's built with the same set of drawings. Okay, and this reconstruction, because it happens every 20 years, it's been happening for the last 1300 years. So there's some method to the madness for having done it. What differentiates it is that the experience and expertise of the people doing it, it's not the same people every 20 years. It's a different set of people every time they do it. And learning, requires a lot of practice and it requires a lot of feedback. So while some things would have worked in the past, there are newer things that come in because you have a different set of people doing it. So the now essentially talks of why diversity and equity and inclusion now is because we are in a different era. Our experiences are different. The knowledge that we're bringing is different. If I just give you my personal example, like, having been in the industry for the last 2 decades, I know that what I started off with as D&I then and DEI today, it's very different, both for my leaders, for myself, for my associates, and for the industry in general. So I like to link it to the AC Jingo. And I think with the fact that every 20 years, the organization also needs to rebuild itself and understand what DEI means is what's going to change. And that's the context that's going to primarily be driven by society and by, what people think personally. So that's what I wanted to share.
Wonderful. Thank you so very much. That was indeed an interesting story. And of course, I think we'll remember that for a long time. I'm going to really invite my long-term friend Anirvan here to really talk about how does diversity, welcome Anirvan, so glad to see you here. And, want to really talk to you a little bit to understand what do you think diversity means for your organization, and how does this really have an impact, on beyond national boundaries, right? I think that's really something I'm very curious, and I'm sure our audience are also curious to understand from you. So take it away, Anirvan.
Hey, thanks, Grace. And just to once again reiterate, thank you for having us, and a big thank you to GWFM for making our weekends enlightened and spending together in a noble cause, right? So, diversity, equity, inclusion, these have been around as terms for quite some time. And I'll take it away from the point that Rajita mentioned, which is that there is an interaction between what we do in our organization and society. If we don't understand that dynamics, we won't understand what we are going to do about D&I within our own organizations, right? So when we apply international boundaries, when an organization operates across international boundaries, I think the reality of the society in each of those nations must be taken into account. And we could therefore end up having in one organization different diversity and inclusion programs, which are tailored to the specific realities of that particular part of the organization, which kind of interacts with the reality of that country, right? The organization itself could have a certain set of core values and a certain set of principles, right, which they subscribe to. They could have a broader strategy, just like the business strategy. They could have a broader strategy around culture, on what diversity, equity, and inclusion means for that organization. But within that broader framework, there has to be a tailoring and a detailing which is relevant to the different parts of the organization in different countries. So just to give you a couple of examples, in CGI, the company which I represent, in France, you have got very strong laws around disability, and therefore there is a very strong trust on the D&I program around that. In North America, both in US and Canada, there are very strong laws around Equal Employment Opportunity Act, which first came in 1964, but which is all the time evolving. So now we have got a situation where in 2008, you have got an act which is talking about genetic non-discrimination, right? So there's an act on genetic non-discrimination in 2008. There's another on disabilities which came up in 1990, which talks about things like Down syndrome and not discriminating around that. So there, the conversation has evolved, and ethnicity, race. There's a terminology called BAME, which is very common in UK. So those are things that are focuses for the diversity activity there, along with gender and sexual orientation. Whereas when I look at APAC and I look at India, and let's say I look at Philippines for a reference frame, I see Philippines has already made more strides on gender and on sexual orientation for the LGBT community, whereas we are still behind the curve in India, right? So the reality of society where the organization is kind of anchored has to drive the diversity agenda. Grace?
Amazing. Thank you, Anirvan. And I'm so much able to relate to what you're saying, especially if you're working in global organizations. Then we really understand and appreciate how the length and breadth of this topic really varies depending on geographies, right? So thank you, Anirvan, for that. So that really leads me to my next question to Yasmeen. So when Anirvan really talked about other geographies and how the topic in questions is really being viewed and acted upon, let's come back to our own country here in India, right? So how does one really define diversity? Is this just a gender thing, or what are some of the elements that we need to look at when we try and define diversity for our organizations? Yasmeen?
Thanks, Grace. And I totally echo what Anirvan shared. I think that's exactly what we're going through, in our organization. But if you look at, the landscape for India and what organizations are doing, today we have the gender diversity, which is really something we see at the forefront. But we also see a shift there where we're talking about LGBTQI and trying to make it more inclusive. So we have started seeing changes in, let's say, even application forms, right? I mean, I'll give an example of BBMP, right? It used to be male, female, but now there is a third category there, which is impressive, which means there is really that shift happening where we are really moving towards that progressive, open country where we are recognizing, acknowledging and accepting very respectfully, that there are people beyond just male and female gender. Having said that, I think if you look at just what diversity is, and I'll give an example of the diversity wheel, which is something that Marin Loden's brainchild, where she talks about various aspects to this. There is spiritual beliefs beyond gender, ethnicity, age, race, sexuality, first language, many things that are there. So there are multiple diversions and dimensions to this, which is demographic, experiential, cognitive, and ethnicity. So I think in India, we will see that we don't have so much of the race conversations that maybe our counterparts across the world will have, like US or Europe, but we would have more about regionalism or just different stratas of the society where we come with social groups, right, which I think is important for us to first recognize that. And to say, I think our goal should be to be aware of where we are coming from, and looking at it as a learning where we integrate all of that into the society so that no subgroup of those groups feels excluded. So I think in India, and I'll give an example here, so in US, we have a program called Belong. So if you look at it, it really talks about mentorship program in the US for, the lower represented, employees, ethnicity, for example, Asians or, Black Americans and, some of those important groups. But we may not have the same thing here in India. So I think in India, having an ERG, because we have ERGs both globally, like all of us in our organizations, it is not relevant because we cannot connect to really what's a race. I think if you say, you're from South India, North India, East or West, I think we're quickly able to, we prejudge, conclude and say, okay, this is how it is, right? And again, within South India, you have so many states, so we categorize people. And I think the first step for us is to stop doing that. Don't bucket people because they come from a certain location, region, caste, color, like you mentioned right at the beginning, right? But to really look at very objectively on what's that difference that we want to do, and have those conversations even in schools, in colleges, right? When we have classes going on, when teachers, professors, everybody really encourages those conversations. When you make volunteering groups, how do you make it inclusive at that level, at the school, college level, because then comes your corporate world, because these are all times where it gets influenced and it gets created for, the larger groups. I think for India, we definitely have a very different stroke of diversity when it comes to comparing with what global organizations do. And I think in India, we definitely need more allyship, because, first we need to learn to speak for ourselves and stand up for, what's going around us. So I would look at allyship as one of the very important aspects when it comes to doing initiatives on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmeen, for decoding. And I think that's why we also have our good friend Anirvan here talking about, living allyship in the true sense, I guess, right? So let's move over to Yamini to really talk a little bit about, of course, Yasmeen decoded this whole gender philosophy to say that it's not just restricted to women in the workplace, right? But when you actually go back to what Anirvan talked about, we in India and most organizations in India are in this very nascent stage of, okay, do I really include a third race in my form, whether it's a BBMP form or my vaccination form, right? I mean, it's something we're still not too sure or too confident about. Now, considering that in the backdrop, Yamini, do you think women in the workforce really have a seat at the table? When I say seat at the table, literally in the true sense, do they have a voice at the table, right? That's really what I want to understand from you, what happens in the real world out there.
Yeah. So for me, I feel every individual, whether it's a man or a woman, has their own journey, right? They do follow a lot of steps to actually go on their journey. And it so happens, invariably, all of us have seen that it is slightly little difficult for women to achieve the same amount of progress in each of our paths. That has been the story eternally. That's how most of us have actually reached a certain stages in our lives and certain positions. What I've actually realized is earlier when we spoke about diversity or hiring women for certain positions, it started right at the level of hiring, right? Even when we start asking questions about selection process, there used to be this prejudged notions about whether a woman actually would leave the career midway, whether a person would actually take a break when they have a child, whether they would take more leaves due to taking care of their parents. Somewhere I feel we have slowly passed all that, right? And a lot of us have actually been more resilient in reaching out these stages. My personal experience, especially in IQVIA, we are so happy and proud to say that we have more than 51% women who are actually being with us in the organization. And most of our business units or departments, functions are actually being headed by women who actually are their core competence actually comes with their experience of even being within IQVIA for more than 20 years and building us, helping us build and progress as we grow. So yes, women in leadership earlier, I would say, was more like a checklist item for a lot of organizations. But I feel as women, we have actually started on this journey, and all of us have actually contributed to get that seat at the table. There are still some organizations which probably still think about, they might be even discussing, sitting across the table, the entire leadership team will be voicing, discussing, talking, but ultimately the women don't get heard. Giving them an opportunity to speak is a different thing, whether you're really truly hearing them or giving importance and value to what is being told, and if that is actually more important and practical, whether the organization is willing to follow that is actually what matters, and how it differentiates between a really matured organization which gives and focuses on equal opportunities for everybody, or an organization which is just doing diversity and inclusion for the sake of, say, being a checklist item for them. A lot of women have made great progress. Organizations have truly given them the place that they deserve, and they are making this, glass ceilings were broken. They've made the changes. They are creating this impact. I would say yes, women are being heard. There's a lot more to do, and a lot more steps to take in this journey. But I'm sure the journey has started. There are definitely people who are actually getting to be decision makers, getting to be key contributors, especially in the last 1.5 year that we have seen in the COVID pandemic. It was never easy for any one of us, right? So organizations have actually sat up and took notice that we really need to approach this entire angle of diversity with a very different perspective, considering how the situations are for, say, each gender, how the situation is for each individual, considering the situation when they are working from home or working from their hometowns, when they are taking care of their children, online classes, parents who were in hospitals. So, in spite of all that, if their performance appraisals, if their performance reviews, everything is going as per their core competencies and work deliverables, that basically proves that we are truly reaching a maturity level in our industry and India, that we know that this is really important, that we take care of our people. That shows that women are at least getting their seat at the table.
Wonderful. Thank you, Yamini. And I'm going to just add to that wonderful response from you. Though I'm a moderator, I'm just going to add my 2 bits here. Right? It's not just so much, it's not only about organizations realizing and providing that voice for women at the table, but I think it's also for women to realize that, you are unique, and that is your power. And that seat at that table is not often given to you, but it is
It has
earned,
to be earned.
right?
Exactly.
You make sure the value that you bring into that table and that conversation's compelling enough for women to really earn that seat at the table. And I think I so much agree with all of what you said. And I'm going to go to my good friend Rajita here to have her help us understand how do we get this entire organization, right? People who are already seated at the table and everybody else around to rally around to build this strategy, and not just build the strategy, but more importantly, make the D&I strategy for the organization work, right? That seems to be one challenge which most organizations are actually grappling with, big and small. And therefore, Rajita, if you could kindly help us understand how could we get everybody to rally around for this common cause, will be wonderful.
Thanks, Grace. It would indeed be wonderful if everybody got the drift, but I can just tell you that we're all, on a journey. We're trying to make it work. Obviously, you take 3 steps ahead, 1 step behind, and 4 steps ahead and 2 steps behind kind of thing. So it's an evolving journey, right? That said, I want to share, my framework, which I have adopted based on my, meditation practice for the last 30 years. It's called the I approach, AAI. A stands for awareness, the other A stands for attention, and the last I stands for intention. So I believe it's not just necessarily on DEI, but anything that we do, if we follow I, it's very helpful. And the reason it's helpful, right, is because Let's talk very practically. When it was D&I, we said, how are you going to measure? What does success mean? Success means X percentage of women. Yamini said it so beautifully. She said all her heads of functions are women. And I was like, shoot me in the head. I don't have all women doing it right now. Of course, it's just about, 25% at the senior leadership, and it's a fintech organization. So obviously, it takes a lot to get women. And then that's what led me to the second thought, right? Because now I'm listening so much, and I'm also just, introspecting from an attention standpoint, that the reason that's also happened is the way the organizations are structured. What I mean by that is, and I don't know if everybody agrees, but I want to share my belief, is that organization is a living being. And the organization can be defined based on its policies, procedures, and practices. But because we are such a patriarchal society for the last couple of thousand years, we moved from being matriarchal to patriarchal. The way we have formed our policies, procedures, and systems are very masculine in nature. So it's only one gender that essentially rules the entire roost. So for you to even have queer associations or affiliations being appreciated, I think it's very tough. And the second part, very practically speaking, is that, you have multi-generations, right? So you will have somebody who's, in the early 60s, depending on the retirement age, some in the 40s, some in the 50s, some in the 20s, wherein everybody has a very different viewpoint of, what they think DEI means. So a true success of DEI would be, to me, is it, and I don't want to say it's driven from the top. Okay, I believe that we've reached a place today where everything doesn't have to be top down. It can be bottom up as well, and it can shake the foundation of an organization. So there are certain networks that are built wherein, using the I framework, people could come back. So, and I can tell you, we've taken a very bold step this year. And you'll say, yeah, it took you 14 years. Yeah, it took me 14 years. We're not going to have DEI as a goal, as a shared goal for anybody. We believe that if you believe this is the right thing, what we're doing in, then we are going to move the needle, and we will do it. So it's also the risk appetite to what extent you want to do it. There are things like reverse mentoring. We've got the entire ELT to actually become mentees of people across the globe. And it has been fabulous. Though there was a lot of pushback initially, you will not believe it. We started with a typical mentoring, then we went to gender mentoring, and then we said, okay, now we're going to do reverse mentoring, right? So we've been experimenting, and there's no, a foolproof or tried method that, yeah, this will work. And just doing drives, hiring women or hiring, different hue affiliations, I don't think that's what we are trying to do. I think at the end of the day, it's that we all believe that this is the right thing to do. And we all believe that we are actually providing an equal opportunity to the right person for the right job. So for that, what we're doing is we have started to inculcate a sense in associates and leaders on micro inequities. You need to understand your biases. We actually partnered along with Harvard on Project Implicit, wherein you get to know your unconscious biases and you keep it to yourself. I mean, HR is not going to drive it for you. Nobody sitting in corporate on diversity and inclusion is going to do it. It's just for you, and you need to know where you are. And then the last, what we've also done is we did ethnography classes and we did ambidextrous leaders. So this essentially helps you get a well-rounded perspective. And then I'm like, you figure and you go, everybody is an adult at the end of the day. I don't want to spoon feed you everything. But then, of course, we need to see how it goes. But this year is proper experimentation without goals in mind.
Thank you, Rajita. And I so much agree with you. This DEI cannot be a goal. It's got to become more of a habit, a culture into the organization, right? You can't just have this as an annual goal and put a number to it and go after it, because that's not the way it's going to really create a lot more impact. So over to you, Harini, to help us understand, how can these D&I initiatives be more effective? I'm sure some of them are effective, some of them are not, but then how can the organization help these initiatives be more effective? And my follow-up question really to the first one is, if it is not effective, if it backfires, if there is negative attention and response to it, how does one deal with it?
Thanks, Grace. So I think to change really and be able to drive D&I and E in any format in any organization, I think what is important is to really see if there is authentic intent in it. If there isn't authenticity, anyone will see through it, and you're going to be caught on the back foot with colleagues. That's the last thing leaders want to have. So if I were to say, what's that one big differentiator? It has to be authenticity, and it has to be driven right from the top. Leaders need to believe in it. Leaders need to speak as well as walk the talk. And when that happens, you'll see a difference, because they need to really be role models of the entire thing. The second most important thing, which is really important for the success of any DEI initiative, is to have wholesome representation across the board. And I think that's also one of the reasons why a lot of organizations have inclusion councils, which ensure that there is sufficient amount of participation from colleagues across the board, across all levels. And we have the entire ally group, which supports them really, really well. What's equally important is, while you have all of these initiatives, you have the right metrics which are actually measuring, are you just doing it as a checklist, or are you really making a difference? And a lot of organizations, sorry to say, still are in the checklist mode. It's going to take a lot of time for us to graduate from checklist to actually making it all about authentic intent. And when that kicks in and you're measuring just the right set of things, the right behaviors come in. So the possibility of those negative behaviors automatically gets out of the culture of the organization. But at the same time, it's a journey to get to that point. And to get to that point, yes, you're going to have enough of stumbling blocks along the way. You will have leaders, you will have managers passing some snide comments, etc. And it's part and parcel of the journey. I think what is very important is that when leaders have such situations coming up, do they have the guts to actually take those hard decisions? And if you have the guts to take those hard decisions and actually follow through, that's when truly the entire culture changes. So yes, that's going to be some hard decisions along the way, but very few organizations have really been able to step it up to that point, because in most of the cases, those hard decisions tend to involve people who are in critical roles and people who are so-called talent. So are you ready to bite the bullet is what becomes the question at that point.
Very, very interesting response. And of course, I am able to relate to this so much, because if you're not really firm on the approach and the goal, then there is no soul you can put into the goal, right? So I think and this is a very touchy topic, and it's very, very important that we make this part of our DNA. All right, so we're going to really go over to Yasmeen to really take a sneak peek at what NextGen has been doing from a diversity and inclusion standpoint. Yasmeen, over to you.
Thanks, Grace. And it was so interesting to hear all my co-panelists share their views. And, it just feels like we're all sitting together, talking about similar situations in our companies. But looking at what NextGen is doing about DEI is, I think for us, it is a message from the top. And we all agree that diversity is definitely being invited to the party, and inclusion is about being asked to dance, right? So in that perspective, how do we really make this happen? So for us, it has begun as a strategic objective, while we have goals, but objectives are really at a much higher end, where we're not talking about specific metrics there, but we're saying, how do you exemplify and enhance our values, culture, and community through diversity, equity, and inclusion at NextGen? So what did we do? I think we really had a lot of conversations, just coffee table conversations, chats with our CEO, CHRO. We asked people to volunteer themselves, made smaller groups across the globe. So we had meetings during India, US timings, and super inclusive. So we had ERGs, which is the employee resource groups. We have different ones for the US and different for India, like I just previously shared, that it need not necessarily exactly be the same. But to have an equal representation across, for example, everybody wants to know the culture. How do we work with teams in India? How do we work with teams in the US? Do we understand each other? Is it a culture in India to work late hours? Do we have to say yes to everything? Can I just say that I can't take this call this evening? So I think even very simple conversations, right? So having ERGs about, let's say, remote work groups or working parents, abled ERGs, how do we spread those wings there? Is something that we started. And largely the key focus is really how to build the empathy muscle. If I'm just going to judge, conclude saying, oh, someone didn't show up for the meeting, of course, you need to follow etiquettes of not making it to the meeting, but not to judge. So how do you build and grow your empathy muscle? How do you, like to Harini's point, real authenticity at work? Because people can see through, I agree with her, right? Networking and visibility of how do we support each other's career paths and, career growth, allyship. So I think all these are things that we're really trying to work, through the ERGs and make it happen. The bottom line, sorry, was someone speaking? No. Okay. So
No,
I think the bottom line really is to create a place of belongingness. We are doing baby steps, Grace. For example, this is like a large strategic objective, but really getting the ERGs to meet together, defining their key objectives of what do we know. Like we put together like a cultural program for both US and India. How do you work? How is family different for someone in the US to India? Like when you hire a person, you actually hire a whole family in India. But in the US, because everybody wants to be part of that decision, that you're making the right decision, and you speak to 10 other referrals, and everyone, HR heads, and everyone has to bless it. But in US, they leave the nest after a certain age, and how do you accept that, and how is it okay? Even applying for leaves, right? Absolutely, even neighbors and friends too, right? So I think understanding those little nuances of where we are, and especially in a remote world today, we've just moved to work from anywhere. So how do you still make sure people, wherever they are being inclusive? So we're talking about creating awareness. So we're trying to do a lot of trainings on what does diversity mean when you hire people. So we're looking at our policies, processes, interview panel, using even words like he, she, slash it, they, like whatever, right? So I think we're just being very mindful of the language, how we're posting jobs, what is our insurance covering. So I think there are many aspects to this, but I think end of it, I think we want to really make sure we're being super mindful about how we're coming across in conversations. It's not so much of metrics. We don't have any metrics or goals for saying you need to have X percentage of women. We already have more than 50% of women leaders in the leadership in India. So we're absolutely okay, but we're not chasing any goals. We're just talking to managers and to everyone saying, just make it comfortable for people and, model the behavior. If you do it, everybody else will do it. Don't be punitive, don't penalize, but try to watch what you're doing. Take a step backward before you move forward, to Rajita's point. So interesting journey. And I think we're really looking at becoming a more mindful organization which enhances our value and culture through community building overall. Thank you.
I loved it. Thank you so much. And I truly appreciate this one word, the sense of belonging, right? And it all starts with individuals. And once we start realizing it, I think, the journey is very smooth way forward, provided everybody in the organization is able to appreciate and
Yes.
recognize that, right?
Absolutely.
So I'm going to go over to Yamini before I actually call in Anirvan. So Yamini, my other question, just switching gears a little bit here, to talk a little bit about how do you think our Indian community or Indian organizations or corporates should embrace the LGBTQI community, right? There's still this so-called taboo about things. When you talk as a group, everybody seems comfortable nodding their head to whatever is being spoken. But when you quiz people individually, are they really comfortable from within to embrace this community? The answers are very few and very blurred, right? So, Yamini, can you kind of help us understand what should corporates, especially in India, do to embrace this community?
Yeah. Grace, I'm going to probably take some bits from my personal experience of what I've seen. Uh, Thankfully, being in this global organization and managing, especially the Asia Pac region, where this is at least in a much more advanced stage, and even handling countries in Africa. So, at least I've had an exposure of how the industry is moving across globally and where we are in India. And I'm sorry to say, I have to agree with you. We are probably nowhere. There are few organizations, especially global MNCs, which are making tiny steps at this point. Uh, we have created campaigns. We have actually done launches of these LGBTQ programs. We have actually published it on our social media platforms. But end of it, whether we are actually giving them the rightful platform that they truly deserve, and whether we are openly creating a culture which accepts them in their true sense without actually the judgmental factors, is something yet to be realized. All of us, especially, I'm sure, as Yasmeen had pointed out, our organizations are now consciously creating these ERGs, right? ERGs which focus on women, ERGs which focus on disabilities, ERGs which focus on LGBTQ communities. But while we are probably at least going much faster, like a relay race and others in gender, and even creating cohesive workspaces for disabled people, when it comes to LGBTQ, there's a lot of judgment still holding us back, especially in the Indian culture. My personal experiences, especially working and handling the Southeast Asian countries like APAC, uh, countries like Philippines, Malaysia, people are much more open to talk about their, the changes in the thought process. When I've even had instances where people have come forward and spoke to me about their change in gender that they want to adopt, and we had actually created a smooth workflow and a process where we know if somebody has to make this transition, how we can help them in a very empathetic way to make sure that their journey is smooth. It's not just about doing the changes in gender on the workday, but it is almost about creating a process where they feel that we are with them, holding their hand and taking them. I've handled cases where we have actually made this entire transition of sensitizing everybody, whether it is the teams working around, the managers, the clients who were interacting, because this is a process transition, and the person has taken this big step of coming out. And when they have that kind of a courage, as professionals, as organization, we need to be lending them that support to help them in that aspect. So we have put in those necessary steps, but when it comes to India, we still don't even know whether people will be even feel that courageous, or they would have that conscious effort to come forward and openly admit or talk about either their sexual orientation or whether their gender transition. uh, it's still a very ambiguous world out there, right? Because as I said, a lot of this, whether not just about gender, it also starts right from our hiring processes, whether it may be a very junior recruiter who's actually doing the initial filtering. Thankfully now we are doing everything over video calls and other things, so probably we never know how things are being made. But right from body languages to the way they speak, people used to judge initially, right? It has taken us a conscious effort to move away from that and give them the true opportunity of coming forward. But for us to sustain and truly give them a space, it's not just about organizations. There's a whole lot of ecosystem that has to come together, whether it is governments, whether it is the media that is projecting all these aspects, the culture of the people, the sensitivity of various regions and states geographically in India, everything has to make a small change in their ecosystem to bring these changes. People need to be, because it's not about just the organization supporting an individual. As I said, in India, and employment is all about the entire family too, right? So whether everybody, right from their parents to family to organizations, whether they are able to helping them in this entire journey, is something which is yet to be realized. I wish to see that someday. Hopefully we will make that progress soon. But yes, I think we have still not started it, as culturally India is very uh, not just judgmental, but we are very conservative. We are very conservative in our thought processes, especially when we have to have somebody sitting along us and working. We really are, there's a lot of doors which are yet to be opened.
True. True. Thank you. Thank you, Yamini. Very, very easily put, simply put, I would say. And I do keep wondering sometimes, right, when we're so caught up in complicated situations, complicated questions, and when we're just about to find answers for those complicated questions, the questions change, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's what keeps happening in our day-to-day lives. And thank you so much for decoding that for us. And of course, I'm going to be inviting Anirvan here to talk to us a little bit and enlighten us about what should this D&I end goal look like, right? We've been talking metrics, we've been talking short-term goals, we've been talking annual goals, we've been talking numbers, we've also been talking about how nasal this whole stage is right now in terms of India not able to take that big leap, and corporates not able to take big steps. So we really trying to walk before we start running. So Anirvan, help us understand, please, what should be that D&I end goal for organizations, Anirvan?
So Grace, let me answer the question at two levels, okay? The first one is very easy. So in my organization, the goal is that we should have men and women in equal numbers reflecting the population at all levels and in all parts of the organization. Okay, so essentially it's the end goal is that we should have a representation pillar where there is even distribution, and obviously it will take time. Actually it is easier to get the numbers in the top levels, and at the bottom level it's a bit more difficult to get it at the middle level, and we are going through that whole process of doing all kinds of strategies and plans and programs to get there. Then there is another pillar, which is the inclusivity pillar or the inclusion pillar, where the end goal is that it is actually very easy, which is about respect. And we should have an organization where there's no unconscious bias, where there's embracing of diversity in all its aspects, and you can measure that through surveys and comments and through listening sessions, which we are very big on, and of course through the employee resource groups, which we call member resource groups. We call our employees members. So through all of that, creating that inclusive culture, and there's a lot of unconscious bias training and all of that goes into it, right? So this would be the end goal as defined by the organization. And while none of those end goals are easy, and they are for sure multi-year objectives, they are well aligned to strategy. It's a relatively simpler thing to start striving after them, right? Not easy to achieve, but easy to start planning for them, working towards that. I think the larger picture is, and you will note that I really talked about only gender, because at a global level, we found that across all countries, that was the most overarching or common dimension of diversity. In all the other cases, race, ethnicity, military service, cognitive diversity, all of that was more a North America thing. Disability was a little bit more broader into Europe. And then, on sexual orientation, as a speaker just before me, just called out in India, till recently it was actually illegal, and only some very progressive Supreme Court judgments have, created an environment which is a little better. And even then, I think most organizations have it as a kind of like a side channel that's kind of happening, right? It's not their main thrust. Some of them, it's still taboo to talk about it. So I think we took that as the common overarching theme. I think as a HR professional, if I take a step back and just relate it to the way the whole subject has evolved, and again going back to the point that you can't do it in isolation, you've got to look at the interaction with society. Just on the gender side, you've got these several waves of feminism that has happened. First wave was about political power and property rights. The second wave was more broader about family, work roles, rights over reproduction, and so on and so forth, right? And in the third wave, you are going into the level of intersectionality. And that's why from gender, in a way, as the mother movement, if you like, you had the whole LGBT movement started to, kind of come through into the narrative. And, I'm not even sure whether the fourth wave of feminism from 2010 onwards has defined itself properly. But the point is that human society is living and ever changing. And much as we would love to think that it's all linear and, steadily it's becoming more egalitarian and liberal, you just need to look at the latest Taliban taking of Afghanistan to understand that history is not linear, right? And, the process, the progress, progressiveness or modernity, may go forward, but then again, it may go back. And that's what it is in a larger scale. And I think as HR professionals, most of us are kind of wedded to a very liberal, democratic, modernist kind of view of the world, and try to, in our own humble way within our own organizations, advocate those principles, if for nothing else but the fact that actually individual human beings appreciate it. And I'm not going to go into the micro level research of saying that how NextGen appreciates an organization which actually has an inclusive culture, and customers appreciate it, and why there's a hard business case on financials around creating an inclusive culture, right? So we advocate that. So my belief is that diversity will never have a permanent end goal. It is a journey. And as society progresses, as new challenges come up, particularly wedded to because we are commercial organizations, wedded to the economic realities, where you have talent which is at a premium, niche skills you can't get easily. You have high attrition. Why on earth will you not tap a huge part of the segment if you can put in all the things that can get that talent to you and keep it, right? And make you a preferred employer of women. It's a commercial advantage. So I think as HR professionals, this is a journey, it's a narrative, and it is about overall tactically playing it into it, and just making sure that there are some lodestones in our organization where we are heading towards it. But the larger narrative will always change in keeping with the social times.
Thank you so much, Anirvan. I think that's really very well put and very realistic, right? It is indeed an absolute journey, and there is no end goal really there. And of course, I think very, very enriching conversation. And in the interest of time, I'd love to thank GWFM and everybody else who's trusted us enough with this panel discussion, and some key takeaways really, summarizing them for you are, of course, there are challenges. Of course, there's confusion, complication around the whole topic of diversity and inclusion and equality. However, this is really not a one-time goal, but I think it is an absolute journey for all of us to embark upon. And really, if organizations look at it top down, bottom up, take the right decisions, make bold decisions, and also really start from where we left or start from the scratch. And at some point, we all know that we will really hit, a level where we can call ourselves successful in the diversity and inclusion space. So once again, that's a wrap from all of us here. Thank you very much, Yasmeen, Harini, Rajita, Anirvan, and Yamini. It was absolutely a pleasure being your moderator, and wishing everybody out there a very, very wonderful evening and rest of the weekend. Thank you so much, Parthoda and Dr. Shiva.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I don't think I'm audible.
No, we can hear